It's Sunday, December 28, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. Our guests today are both journalists covering the radical right. Jared, a journalist and senior researcher at Open Measures, whose work on hate and extremist movements has appeared right across the US media. Michael is an investigative journalist and analyst of right-wing populism, formerly with the Southern Poverty Law Center. His first book, Strange People on the Hill, will be published by Bold Type Hachette in 2026. Together, they co-host a bi-weekly news podcast, Posting Through It, where they bring hard-earned context to the stories shaping the far right on and offline. Jared Holt and Michael Edison Hayden, welcome to the Weekend Show. Your podcast that I've just finished listening to, an episode entitled Cash for Christmas, was rather brilliant in its ability to kind of step back and see how ridiculous some of the drama that America is facing right now kind of really is. Do you, like me, feel that there has been a failure maybe by the media and commentators and even other politicians to kind of laugh these people off the stage because so many of the leadership in the executive branch and beyond are morons?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is as terrifying as it is ridiculous. You know, I think a lot of people hold in their head, like, you can either be this cartoonish villain or you can be dangerous. But I think it can be both. And what we do on the show, I mean, we try to mix serious analysis of it and the consequences of it with also just letting ourselves admit how ridiculous it is. That we have an FBI director who, you know, is sitting down with the wife of the head policy wonk in the Trump administration, talking about how, you know, his secret talent is compartmentalizing. And, you know, what he likes to do is just call up some Uber Eats and smash some Paramount Plus shows. You know, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous that that's who's leading this country right now. But in terms of FBI directors, you know, as far as those go, I'd rather have somebody who's, you know, thinking about Uber Eats and going to eat at restaurants in Las Vegas than somebody who might actually be interested in cracking down on the left the way the Trump administration is fantasizing about.
Yeah, I think that's the main point, Jared, is that if you were concerned about the Trump administration cracking down on leftists, the best thing that could have ever happened to you is Kash Patel, because he's just not motivated at all. As he told Katie Miller on his podcast, he's basically like, you know, I like to go watch hockey documentaries. I like to watch Paramount Plus. I like to watch some sleazy stuff on Netflix. We're going out. We're getting surf and turf every week. That's his mentality.
Yeah.
And his mentality, you know, thank God, because if you see people like Andy Ngo, I don't know how many people in your audience would be familiar with Andy Ngo. He's the guy who's like was assaulted by anti-fascists after, like, quite frankly, he was really provoking the crowd at that time. It was like in 2019. He became a mini celebrity in MAGA that shows like the sort of violence of the left. He on X was repeatedly like quote tweeting and messaging publicly Kash Patel to do something about Antifa, just arrest them all, try to arrest people like me and Jared. And then he went to the White House and was crying, you know, publicly about the beating he suffered several years ago and saying like this, we need to make them a foreign terrorist organization. The problem for the country is that they've hired this big mass of incompetence. But the good thing for the country is that they're all incompetent and they can't execute a fascist vision like you would imagine, like some sort of Mussolini, like whatever, right?
Right.
They're really struggling to get that going.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's at times like this that you crave boring and serious. And this is a problem right across the world with a lot of these kind of far right characters that have found leadership positions. it tends to be because it's in environments where people were just bored with politics or said, oh, they're all the same. And so people like Javier Milei, for example, they kind of grab the attention of society. And it means that you're voting against your own best interests, because invariably these people are completely incapable of organizing a fight in a bar. And we have the same problem in the UK at the moment with a prime minister who is, to all intents and purposes, very good, Keir Starmer. But because he's boring, the chances are he will be voted out in favor of the far-right Trump friend Nigel Farage. So just looking at the world landscape, do you, like me, feel this kind of concern that these comedy characters are actually they're more interesting to voters?
I think so. There's a lot of valid reasons to be dissatisfied with the status quo in politics. And I think these, as you said, comedic characters, these sort of larger than life figures, they're often, if you look at their rhetoric, they're making these larger than life promises, right? And I think what propelled the first Trump election, and to some extent again in 2024, is this dissatisfaction with the status quo of politics in the U.S., democratic politics, but we're seeing that around the world too. And, of course, there's also a huge influence of the fact that there are just people in the country that are enchanted by racist rhetoric, or this rhetoric of wanting to do harm to other people that they view as an outgroup. But, part of it too is I think these sort of almost laughable figures are just so different that to people who maybe don't follow politics or aren't as informed, they might think, why not? Why not just give this a shot? It sounds crazy and
right.
manic and like a bad dream, but as opposed to what, So I don't know. I mean, like with any election, there's a million different factors that all play a contributing role, but I think that's definitely part of it.
Well, this whole authoritarian wave of politics is tied into also this unrestrained free market grift stuff that is, it's not just like normal capitalism that you would imagine 20, 30 years ago. It's this kind of hyperbolic, crazy version that's tied into crypto and all that. And everybody kind of has given up in their mind of thinking the system is fair. So everybody wants to win at gambling. And I think that's really, you mentioned Millet, that's like a real appeal of him down there. But I think that's an appeal for in a place like England as well, where if people feel like discontent about what they have in their pockets. And also I have a question about Farage. Like how would you feel about, sort of answering to a man who is famous in part for hanging out with Cassandra Fairbanks, who is, I guess she has a new name, right, Jared? Like she got married a couple of years ago. But Cassandra Fairbanks was like a C-list MAGA influencer who was kind of famous for pretending to be a Bernie supporter for a while and then switching to Trump. It felt very much like an op. And she has like a bunch of monkeys that she dresses in diapers and little children's clothes and stuff like that. And so like when I think of Nigel Farage, I think of him hanging out with Cassandra Fairbanks and like Jack Posobiec, the piss test influencer. This is rough for me because I don't know about you, Jared. He's kind of like InfoWars tier influencer in my mind, Nigel Farage.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
but he is in Parliament, and he does have 5 or 6 seats in Parliament.
You need to stop.
So this is the problem.
Any further.
He has already kind of infiltrated the British political system, and with Elon Musk's money, which looks like there might be investment there too. I lived through Brexit, and so to me that was a kind of huge lesson in the UK where we were convinced it would never happen, whereas you guys might have been convinced that Trump wasn't going to win in 2016. And yet it happened, and it was like, this is just not right. I mean, the status quo has shifted significantly. The sad thing with the UK is that you might have thought that Brits had learned their lesson from the failure of Brexit to bring the jobs and bring the prosperity that Nigel Farage promised when he said we would take back control. And here we are, nearly a decade later, with the UK really struggling and now looking to blame migrants in small boats for the reason why there are no jobs. So, it's
a cliche, but obviously, like Brexit, widely considered the canary in the coal mine sort of thing.
Yeah.
And definitely, I remember very much. I was working at ABC News at the time, and I was covering it as a kind of a breaking news politics reporter, and just the anger that people felt, not just in the UK but outside of it, that it could happen. And just trying to figure out exactly who might have been the voters behind it and what motivated them, et cetera. It was a really huge moment. And I hope that it serves as a warning to kind of stop Farage's trajectory, but who knows?
But could all of this have something to do with the age of the countries? Because obviously, the UK is much more evolved in terms of its constitution, which is so evolved. There's no kind of written copy of it. It's just kind of assumed and understood. And whereas with the US being so young and nubile in terms of kind of countries and political history, that the US is still going to be making the major mistakes that the UK and Europe has made, over thousands of years.
I have no idea. It's, I mean, yes, it's, Americans also have this sort of grandiose mythology about themselves of like American exceptionalism, right? Thinking, if the grass is greener on the other side, it must be here. And I think you see that reflected across media too. It's like when Trump was elected, there was this race in a lot of mainstream media outlets to try to rationalize it. Everything has to be rationalized in some way. Even these cartoonish figures making these just laughable gaffes and mistakes and enacting these horrible, unpopular policies. There's everything. There's this temptation, I think, where people want it to make sense. If that's right. Clear, so you get the pieces like the infamous Nazi Next Door piece in the New York Times, that profile a lot of people criticized, and this sort of search to find a reason or to find legitimacy. And I think if we look out at media today, some of the people that have risen to the top, even as the industry overall has changed drastically, have been the people who have been able to identify people in power, not so subtly referencing people like Barry Weiss here, and have been able to flatter them, rationalize them, and kind of cook up a reasoning behind this, even though the way I see it, the reasoning is just hate and a bigger element, greed.
Well, I think the youth of the United States, as you put it, relative to the rest of the world, I think that factors in the sense that we're getting a real glimpse of what American fascism really looks like. Because, I mean, that word, has been used a lot, but I think we all kind of sense that MAGA is a fascist movement, right? They don't want anybody in power but themselves, and they're willing to do almost anything in order to keep that. But it has these other characteristics, like I said, like the grifty crypto stuff and everything else, the silliness of it, right? The WWE style entrances that they use at TPUSA conference. This is like a very American style thing. This is not the sleek, like German orderly. This is a very different sort of thing. And right. I think that more than anything, and God willing, we don't see this continue for another 10 years. Hopefully we're able to rein it in, because I'm very scared about where it might go. We certainly see some of the sick stuff that they're trying to do, like all the blowing up boats, Alligator Alcatraz, the use of Sicat in El Salvador. These are all very worrying trends about where it might go. But this is our first glimpse of what I think American fascism really might look like.
It's very interesting the language you use, which most people use, and this, is this a sign of where it might go? But it's already there. I mean, Sicat is a concentration camp, right? So we are using these kind of flags to say, okay, well, this is what will end up happening. But we've kind of passed that point. And as you said earlier, we've maybe allowed ourselves to normalize it a little bit when it is anything but normal. This is the rise of the far right and arguably the Nazification of American politics. I mean, is it fair to say that this is a kind of there is a direct comparison with the Nazification of Germany in the 1930s?
I'll lean on historians. I am not a historian. I've been a reporter and researcher for a long time, but a lot of them are alarmed at the parallels. Certainly economic circumstances are not as dire in the U.S. now as they were during the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. But a lot of the themes were the same, is this promise of prosperity, if only we can just deal with this outgroup, a Nazi that was immigrants, Jewish people, and a whole host of other marginalized groups. And I think we're seeing the same. But the point that you make of it kind of already being here, it can certainly get much worse from here if it goes unchecked. But yeah, this sort of, one of my standing pet peeves is the, mainstream media op-ed page column that's like, wow, we're really going in a weird direction. It could get pretty bad, but it is bad. It's horrible,
Right. Well, it's white people invariably who write those articles.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. We are at that point now of show me your papers, and people are having to carry their paperwork, people of color and people who are even seeking naturalization, for example, being arrested at their interviews. I mean, that is the Nazi kind of behavior that I recognize. And a lot of the reporting does seem to be pretty slow to draw that comparison. But when people like Timothy Snyder have moved to Canada, that to me is a sign that this is very serious.
Yeah, it's serious, but I don't know. I kind of would have wanted him to stick it out a little bit. That's me personally. That's my personal taste. Would have appreciated it. I mean, it's not like I'm not dealing with stress.
Sure. I mean, in his defense, he found a university that would enable him to continue working without fear of being silenced. And I think the point that he wanted to make is that it's easier for him to he's doing a lot more media now than he ever did from the comfort of a Canadian university. Let's just talk about, these characters involved, because if we talk about immigration, Kristi Noem has just purchased half a dozen Boeing 737s so she can fly her own deportation flights. Kash Patel's just ordered a bunch of BMW X5s for the FBI. There is a lot of this kind of performative stuff. I think ICE bought a couple of Cybertrucks and kind of branded them up as well. I mean, this is kind of where it's headed. It's like a kind of Mad Max feeling in a way. Just tell me about the kind of the performative nature of it, and where the reality of these abductions and this kind of attitude towards migrants and the hatred of this movement, where that kind of meets the theatricality.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the Cybertrucks. That's more like MAGA capitalism, right? Where it's just sort of pay money to buy the election. Once the election is bought, get the money funneled back to you through a bunch of government contracts. At least that's the way it feels to me. I don't know how it feels to everybody else, but that's pretty bad. And then, as for Kash Patel, I mean, I'm sure he was with the FBI was just like, he's like, yeah, man, let's get some BMWs in here. That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. Let's do that. But I think that's a lot of the impulses that we're seeing from these guys. It's just like, do something that seems cool, right? It's like Trump wasted so much time restructuring the White House and then putting a bunch of weird plaques underneath everything, just that were shit posts. I mean, the optics of that are only acceptable if people are eating. And I really feel that the economy is on a very thin, it's on very thin ice right now. And I don't know if you guys agree with that, but for me, that type of stuff is going to look a lot worse in 2026 if the economy really does take a dive.
But they are lying about the numbers now. So that's what's changed in a way, that there's this idea that we can lie about jobs numbers or just not release the figures, or we can lie about GDP and that will be okay. How is that going to play out when you're completely factually inaccurate about what the economy is doing publicly? Where's the biting point?
I wonder that, right? Because at the end of the day, people still have to go get their groceries.
Yeah.
I buy health insurance on the market and had to switch plans because my premiums went up 80%.
Wow. For
no apparent reason.
Yeah.
Right. I think the economic points, they can promise, I saw Howard Lutnick go on TV and say, the GDP is up 4.5%. And that means that Americans have 4.5% more money. And I thought, man, that must sound awesome if you're dumb. Like,
are they not relying on people?
I still
dumb?
have to go to the grocery store. I have to pay that health insurance I talked about. Everything I buy seemingly is just getting more and more expensive. And at some point, I think I would imagine in a lot of people's heads, this sort of performative cruelty, right? Because I think that's what buying the planes, buying BMWs at the FBI, all of that, it's about creating a spectacle out of the cruelty and sort of viciousness of the policies, right? Whether they work or not, whether they are enacting them at the scale they would hope to, they're trying to put on the show because they ran this 2024 campaign on the message of retribution. Biden won in 2020 and this is payback, right? So they have to put on the show of payback. And that's what the voters that elected them want, is to see the people that they were told are responsible for all of these things, this and that, suffer. And to do it in style with, hype cuts on X, the Everything app or whatever. But the economic stuff, at some point, I feel like you can only ride that line so long before people kind of sniff it out.
And there's like a flashpoint, yeah.
And that only and their approval ratings are in the toilet too. So it's hard for me to imagine that's really going to work out the way they thought it. The way they seem to hope that it will.
Yeah,
I agree with Jared. I just wanted to just contribute also that they are counting on Americans being too insecure to admit to themselves that they're really suffering. Because it's this winner loser culture, and everybody is like, there's this notorious BIG line where he's bragging about his life, and he says, "Sex and expensive cars." is one of the descriptions, just like part of a line. And it's like, that to me is always America. It's like, oh yeah, I'm having sex in expensive cars. Like, it's just this wish fulfillment, this idea that's just like everything's just going to be awesome and big and perfect. And we're going to get this fleet of BMWs at the FBI for some reason. Everything is awesome. Like, and if you're not like that, then there's this insecurity. You want to hide it because you feel like there's something wrong with you. And they're really counting on that insecurity, I think, consciously or unconsciously.
So it's almost like the measure of success, not just with the American dream for people, but also for this regime, is that as long as they've got the fast cars and that kind of that image is showing that things are going in the right direction, they'll just have to keep buying bigger and bigger planes and larger and faster cars, I guess. But I think my point is that American people are not as stupid as Trump and his henchmen would like to think they are, and that people have really great instincts for what is right and what is wrong. I read a report yesterday that suggested that people are starting to connect the economic woes with with Trump's failure on climate change, and how that there is this connection. And I was quite surprised by that people realize that there is actually a connection through about inaction on climate. And we've just had crazy weather throughout the US, and yet every weather report I see, nobody mentions climate change. It's like it's been completely banned from any coverage, making that connection. People are like, oh my God, I didn't realize this was going to happen at Christmas. And it's like, we've been talking about this stuff for 40 years. So let's just kind of look at as I see it, this kind of rise of the far right that you report on. Michael, is there anything that has happened in the last year of this administration that has shocked or surprised you? Have they gone further than you thought they might have done? Or were you kind of predicting that it would be this bad?
I was predicting that they would go after green card holders. I have a lot of green card holders that I know. I mean, I have immigrants on my family all over. I predicted that back in 2016, just because I was really focused on Stephen Miller. But when they did it, I was surprised. So I was saying they were going to do this. So I was verbally saying it, but then I was emotionally surprised. Does that count as something? And I think that it's just sort of saying for years that these people are scary and they have a really scary agenda, and then actually experiencing it is a totally different matter. I don't know how Jared feels about it.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, I think the degree in which they've disregarded the opinion of courts has shocked me. I mean, one of the first Trump administration's big bragging lines is that they had appointed so many federal judges, and I thought, okay, well, that'll pay dividends, right? But even some of those judges have been telling them, no, you've got to get out of Chicago. No, you can't do that. And the administration has been sending these hacky lawyers and essentially saying, so what? Who cares, right? And that's a real stress test in a democracy. If the courts don't mean anything, then you've got one of the three parts of the balance of power out of whack or out of the board. And I think that has surprised me. Not that they would threaten to do that, because they've talked about that for a long time, but that they've actually tried.
A British anti-disinformation campaigner who lives in DC and is a green card holder, as far as I know, Imran Ahmed. He's the chief executive of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. And he's one of 5 European nationals who's now been barred from the US by the State Department after being accused of seeking to push tech firms to censor or suppress American viewpoints. This has caused a ricochet right across Europe, with the Europeans and certainly the UK kind of saying, you've crossed a line here. This is almost election interference. The kind of the way that the US has responded to this. This seems to me quite a stealth-like way of enacting this kind of these far-right policies to say, well, we want to deal with our own kind of free speech in-house, and if you have an opinion, then you can't come in and join the conversation. Jared, how did you feel when you heard about this and the 4 others that had been sanctioned in this way?
I mean, it was surprising in a sense that they would go through with it, but also unsurprising because this administration seems to take all of its policy cues from, whatever people that reply to their post on X and Facebook,
right.
Whatever they're screaming at them about.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be that seems to be the barometer that they're using to gauge how they're doing, is how the Cat Turd 2s and Gunther Eaglemans of the world are reacting to them, which is insane. But they're just like chasing these weird hobby horses, right? Of like, we're mad about quote unquote censorship or whatever, so we're gonna experiment with ways of using the levers of federal power to chase them down. And I think what they're forgetting is that even at its peak, I mean, when it was Twitter, it was still a very small subset of American society. And that's certainly diminished as, you know, after Elon Musk took it over and the site just became borderline unusable for a normal person.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I just imagine like talking to my dad. My dad doesn't know like who any of these people are. He doesn't care. You know, he just wants the tax rate to go down, and like, you know, he's one of those like, I would like the government to leave me alone types.
Sure.
So it's like,
because that's the contradiction, isn't it? You know, Trump kind of ran on small government. Traditional conservatives prefer small government, and yet this government has turned out to become its own deep state anyway, and it's becoming enlarged just by nature of its outreach. Michael?
Yeah, I mean, well, they were enthralled with the idea of the deep state as a conspiracy theory. I mean, it was the type of thing that filled up so many stories for them, right, forever, and they became envious of it, and they wanted to do it, right? I mean, they wanted to do their own.
That's
deep
the
state.
irony of having Kash Patel being the FBI director and Dan Bongino. I mean, these guys were kind of conspiracy podcasters together, and now they get inside the FBI, they open the files, they realize that the deep state is just the federal government, and there is no conspiracy there, but they can't really say that stuff out loud.
Well, Kash would rail that the previous FBI directors were spending tax money on themselves, and that's literally all he does. So it's like that's where they get their ideas from. I should just point out about the disinformation point. I mean, all this tells you is that authoritarians cannot win without disinformation, because they will empower only a very small slice of the American public if they when in power. That's the only thing they can do, right? Is they can only empower themselves and their friends and other people who are close to the regime. And it's a bunch of ass lickers, excuse my language, all the way up, right? But that doesn't cover everybody. And the rest of people suffer under this sort of thing. And we're seeing it right now. They need disinformation to keep those other people going and in line. So that's why it's really important for them to try to punish people who point out political disinformation and its power, right?
We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the cover-up of the Epstein files, and also the fact that we are now apparently at war with Nigeria. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. My days are always packed. Meetings, deadlines. When I finally hit the mattress at the end of the day, I need it to deliver. My Legend mattress from Lisa has completely changed how I recharge at night. It gives me the kind of deep, restorative sleep that I didn't realize I was missing. I've learned that how you sleep is just as important as how long you sleep, and Lisa really delivers on the how. My Legend adjusts to my body and sleep position in a way that feels intentional and balanced. The support helps me fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. My Legend from Lisa is the closest thing I've found to a staycation. The second I lie down, everything quiets. It's plush, peaceful, and somehow instantly relaxing. It's the one part of my day that feels indulgent in all the right ways. Lisa isn't just about sleep, it's about impact. They donate thousands of mattresses each year to those in need, while also partnering with organizations like Clean Hub to help remove harmful plastic waste from our oceans. Go to lisa.com for 25% off mattresses, plus get an extra $50 off with promo code WEEKEND, exclusive for our listeners. That's LEESA.com, promo code WEEKEND for 25% off mattresses, plus an extra $50 off. Support our show and tell them we sent you after checkout. Lisa.com, promo code WEEKEND. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on the weekend show with Jared Holt and Michael Edison Hayden. I'm Anthony Davis. The Epstein files were due to drop last week. It was a deadline that had been imposed by kind of a bipartisan bill, but also that Donald Trump signed, that he agreed to, that the courts had said had to be done, and the deadline came and went, and it was a bit of a damp squib of a bunch of redacted documents, and then they backtracked and said there were more to come, and then there was one with Donald Trump's face that had been covered up, and then they took that back, and then they revealed his face. I mean, it was a disaster, really, and a lot of people were running around saying, you know, they're not to be trusted. I can't believe they haven't done what they said they were going to do. And then the rest of us were like, of course they were never going to release the Epstein files. You guys have done a lot of coverage of this. Michael, what were you expecting to happen, and how do you think this story will play out? And do you think that the Democrats are doing the right thing, putting so many of their eggs in this Epstein files?
The last part is a good question. I think people need to have this association between Trump and Epstein. I think that the public deserves that. And I think what they're trying to do is reach his supporters and let them know. If you recall, in 2016, riding into the 2016 election, his base made a huge deal about the Pizzagate conspiracy theory in Comet Ping Pong. We don't need to review the whole thing, but yeah, there's no basement, and it came from John Podesta's emails,
no basement,
and the idea was that, like, you know, pizza represents little girls and like hot dogs as little boys. I mean, it was really like, it's, I find it very strange to just sit around and imagine different things you can associate with little children and sex. I think that's weird, but that's what was done. And Michael Cernovich, who is a male, you know, a men's health, male supremacist kind of crackpot, was one of the people who pushed it. Jack Posobiec, who we previously mentioned on this show, is another person that pushed it. It was pushed on InfoWars and other places, and it resulted in somebody firing a gun in Comet Ping Pong in December, actually right around this time in December of 2016. So that happened. Then that ended it, the gunshot thing, and then QAnon started in its wake. And this is a simplification, and Jared probably knows way more than I do about that transition. But it basically went from Pizzagate to QAnon, and then they became a big sprawling pedophilic conspiracy thing that just had so many weird offshoots and weird stories or whatever. So Trump's base has been sustained by this idea that this thief, this grifter, this literal criminal who is, who takes everything for himself, gives people nothing, is a slob, is disgusting, is all these things, that he's fighting pedophiles, right? That has been the story. So I think that this is not your full question. You asked a few questions, but I'm focusing on the Democrat thing. I think it is important to associate this man with the world's most famous pedophile. Because when the Epstein story finally saturated into the MAGA base, I think people understood that it was real and then supplanted QAnon. QAnon has not been what it was. And now you need time, because these people are not fast learners. You need time to let this association linger. It is one of the best bets to disentangle some people who will ride or die with Trump no matter what. People who buy like Trump cards and Trump holograms and whatever. Reaching these people is very, very difficult. But this is a true story about his associations. We don't know exactly what he did or not. We can't speculate on here. But to be clear, he is now, I think, very publicly associated with pedophilia because of his association to Jeffrey Epstein.
And I think everybody can see the cover-up, right? That was sort of the brunt of these conspiracy theories, is that the deep state, quote unquote, big air quotes here, because there is a, in a literal sense, a deep state, if we're just talking about bureaucrats and governments, of course that exists. You can't have the entire Department of Defense or entire federal agencies turn over every 4 years. Of course, there's career people in these places, right? But the way that it's imagined as a cabal that's like secretly running the government, like years ago in Turkey or whatever, that's ridiculous. And the brunt of these conspiracy theories has been that I think why the Epstein stuff, why QAnon, why Pizzagate took over is because it is an easier way to get an audience not only to be opposed to it, but to take it to the extreme. It's like these people aren't just bad or doing things we don't like, but they're evil. And they're really engaged in something sinister, something they're covering up and protecting the darkest things on earth, like pedophilia, sex trafficking, that sort of thing. So the brunt of these conspiracy theories and why Trump was the hero figure in them is that he was going to come in and bust it all wide open and shed sunlight all over the thing. And then the cover-ups would be exposed. People would go to jail, military tribunals. I mean, some of these fantasies were really violent and deranged. And now they're doing it. Now they're covering it up. Now they, get, ex-influencers at the White House, parade them around with binders, and then, a couple of weeks later come out and
are you familiar with that, Anthony?
There's.
Oh yeah. I mean, that coincided with Pam Bondi saying the files are on my desk, and that had a huge backlash, didn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
So people are getting mad about that, right? And they're like, well, there's going to be more to come. We're reviewing them. And then there's a month or two of silence. Presumably this review is underway. And they come out of the room after this review and are like, well, you know what? I actually don't think there's that much to see here. And now that some of it is coming out, it just looks worse and worse. And they fought it tooth and nail. And now they're trying to pivot and be like, well, this is the most transparent administration in history. That's one of their favorite lines, right? But I think, to the point you made earlier about people not being stupid, everybody saw over the course of the year, they fought tooth and nail to stop this from happening. And now that it is happening, there's like scrambling to do redactions so that they don't get fired by their boss, and it's, I think it's plain as day, and attack them on that. I don't know. I mean, this is very simple. And to Mike's point, it could be the kind of thing that breaks through to his supporters. It's like, well, they, slash the federal government, all of these aid programs. They're handing out just, giant contracts in cartoonishly corrupt ways to their buddies. They said they wanted to save money, but they're ballooning the budget. And how much of that effort, all the while, they're not delivering on the economy. They're not delivering, the promised benefit of tolerating all of this is not coming through. And it seems like a top priority of the federal government is protecting the boss, who seem to be pretty close friends with probably the most notorious pedophile of the 21st century.
What's going to kind of against the Democrats here is the fact that yes, obviously Trump's association with Epstein should be a killer. It should be an electoral killer. It should put him to like negative popularity.
Yeah.
But the photographs of him existed before. And sort of everyone sort of knew they had a relationship, and people elected him again. And that is the scary thing, I think, with Trump, is just like there are all these electoral killers in this a guy who's convicted of a crime. Is charged with multiple crimes.
Yeah.
In a way that there's just no precedent for this. I thought that was when I thought he was going to win all through, and then that came out, and I was like, maybe not.
So if you have the president on tape talking about sexual abuse and being proud of it, I don't personally see how any more Epstein stuff is going to change people's opinions to any great extent. I mean, the reality is that I suppose, now we have victims of Jeffrey Epstein pleading with Donald Trump to not make this political and to release all the files. You have the suicide of Virginia Giuffre, who was, one of the very prominent victims of sex trafficking, and obviously the entanglement with the former Prince Andrew, who seems to have, at least someone's been held to account, being stripped of his titles and sent into exile. But for Donald Trump, everything just seems to slide off this guy. And so that's my worry for the Democrats, is that, just relying on him kind of falling because of this, I just don't think it's going to happen. I mean, I also have a sadistic fear that some people are kind of proud of his sexual exploits.
I am scared of that happening, with just the power of Trump's influence campaign, the degree to which everything associated with him becomes heroic overnight. I am a little concerned of people being like, that's cool, actually. Epstein is cool now. I am scared of that transition potentially coming. Hopefully we never see it, and I hope that's an insane fear of mine. But I did consider that, just in the way everything that comes in front of this base, at least like the real base within the base we're talking here, like the real hardcore people who just seem unbreakable. They start to justify almost anything.
But didn't Pam Bondi this week say that some of the evidence is inaccurate, and there is it's not all to be believed, despite the fact that it's published in the Epstein file.
No, I mean, of course, internal police records are often filled with false information as they're chasing down leads, as they're getting tips. That should be like the grain of salt everybody takes some of this stuff with, right? But so she's not wrong, but I don't know that it's going to be that convincing in terms of whether this really rocks his support. I mean, I don't think it's enough, right? If you look at the campaigns of people like Zohran Mamdani and that sort of thing, the way I think we defeat this sort of MAGA fascist movement has to be with a positive vision that, if fulfilled, could materially make a difference in people's lives. I don't think it is enough to run a Trump is bad and we're the grown-ups campaign. That has failed over and over again. But I also, because I think the Epstein stuff, the depravity of, spending government money on changing all the Department of Defense business cards to say Department of War. Like, all of that works for Trump if his supporters think they're in on the scam, right? They know he's a scammer, he's a criminal, he's corrupt, it's whatever. But they have rationalized this in their head of being okay somehow because, you know, this is going to mess with the system enough and something better will come out of it.
Yeah. Well, they want to back a winner as well, don't they? And he sells himself as the winning ticket every time.
If they don't score these
they
wins,
don't want to back a loser.
If we do enter a period of more severe economic hardship, if things get more difficult in people's lives, that message is going to be less compelling. And while the Epstein stuff, I think, can break through to other audiences and, you know, developing that honest negative association between Epstein and Trump is worth something, you also have to address the rest of the picture and offer, you know, not just a criticism, but a positive vision that can excite people, inspire people, and make them feel hopeful. Because it, you know, this year in American politics has been very bleak. And again, looking at a campaign like Zohran Mamdani's, why that managed to move the needle so much despite all of the money and, you know, attacks against that campaign is because it gave people hope. You know, people were excited. They went out of their way. People that don't normally get involved in politics got involved. And I think the Democrats are going to need something like that, because it's one thing to like defeat Republicans electorally, but if you want to really shut the door, you have to give people an equally exciting idea of what the future could be, but one that does not involve fascism, basically.
And an honest candidate. I mean, Mamdani's success was, I think, because of the authenticity of his offering, and including with its imperfections. You know, it wasn't glossy and glitzy. It was very much grassroots and very traditional, and maybe we haven't seen that for a while. But does that not beg the question, because Trump is so inauthentic and because everything that they do is performative, does that not mean that when it comes to the vote, both for the midterms and for the general in 28, that they have no intention of giving people a free and fair vote? And that is baked into their plan to stay in power. I mean, there's a lot of talk of there's no way he'd be building himself a ballroom/bunker if
That's
he plans
what keeps
on
Mike
leaving,
awake
right?
at night.
This is actually the topic that I bring up quite frequently on the show. I should say, you said Trump is not authentic. I think that's not necessarily the full thing. He is very authentically inauthentic, in the sense that, like, no, but it's true. Like, that's part of his success. He's like such
meta,
a bullshitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there's a sort of like, you know, I don't want to use the word postmodern. I don't know. There's a performative veneer around Trump, and then you understand that he's so good at manipulating things and pushing buttons and so forth. I think that people like that. They like the fact that he's sleazy, that he will do whatever. They like the fact that he's got a shark-like mentality in terms of getting power for himself. They admire it and they want it in themselves, and that's part of the appeal of Trump. But as to your question, yeah, I'm seriously concerned about that, because I think that they got absolutely rocked and shocked to their system in 2025. They did not expect such a bad outcome in particularly New Jersey. They thought they had a chance to win it by a short amount of votes. They had Jack Posobiec down there doing like his kind of one-man performance, which is usually a sign that they're like they need somebody to kind of hustle together some votes. They had Scott Pressler, who is a character we can revisit at another time. He's a very bizarre person who is obsessed with, you know, he's like basically their on the ground guy. They made a big deal about New Jersey, and then it went 16 points or something like that the other direction of where they were pointing to in polls. So they learned a very valuable lesson, which is that people really, really hate them right now. And voters at least do. Or the majority of them. And Yeah, there are a lot of things that they can do in 2026 if they really believe that things are not going great. It could also accelerate their demise if they start to take certain terms, right? So one thing that they may do is try to get, maybe station troops or whatever around voting places to make it more intimidating for people to vote and more scary. Why I say that is if everyone knows that, I mean, if we get these polls down in the 20s, like, and they're in the low 20s or something like that, we're talking about Katrina Bush type stuff. When they start taking actions like that, I think everybody's going to be like, all right, we know the deal. We know the deal, dude. We know what you're doing. You're losing. And so therefore you're trying to do something about it. But if they keep it here and they're able to keep sort of a facade that looks like it's, kind of okay. And it's like, hey, we got a ballroom and we got some cyber trucks and stuff like that. Maybe they're able to enact some kind of effective campaign to either deter voting or, God forbid, undo it in some way. That's really scary. One thing I want to point out also, because we sort of talk in different terms, you mentioned climate change a while back. That's really an X factor here, is that Trump has not really encountered any kind of profound natural disaster of any kind. And these things do happen in the United States frequently. And I hope they don't with this, especially with this group. I really hope they don't. But there are all kinds of things that could happen that would throw this whole conversation into a. COVID is a perfect example of that.
Right. Like COVID, for example.
A climate change related disaster is one. A terror attack, on a wide magnitude, be it right wing terror or Islamic terror or something else, right? So there's a lot of things we can't even factor in now, and these are the type of things that can give Trump another 10 points onto his approval rating, or it can send him into the complete toilet, as Katrina did for Bush.
I was always struck when Trump had Zelensky in the Oval Office the first time, and before they started screaming at each other, he kind of accused him of cancelling elections because there was the war in Ukraine, and then he looked at the camera and was like, oh, well, if you can do that, then maybe I could do that too. And it kind of planted a seed in Trump that if there's a war on, then he doesn't need to hold elections. And because you tend to see his brain working on the outside, it worried me a lot more than much of the media picked up on. We're now seeing, considering Trump ran on being the no-war president and a peacetime president, and a claim to have ended 8 wars, many of which either didn't exist or are still raging. He's now gone to war with Nigeria under very thin claims of trying to protect Christians from ISIS. This is very, very serious, and arguably is the start of Trump wanting to kind of make Europe and Africa great again. There's a lot of talk of how he won't stop at Nigeria, and we're also starting to hear about the collateral damage, that it is actually just regular people in villages that are going to lose their lives kind of yet again, and this will be kind of it's really no different to Russia invading Ukraine. Let's talk about this and whether or not you think it might have an effect on Trump's decision to hold an election.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems to be the calculus, right? And you can see that in their domestic rhetoric about immigration. They talk about it like an invasion, right? That's sort of the rationale behind what they're doing in Venezuela, or at least it was initially. Now they're just openly, almost a self-parody of U.S. foreign policy, like, we want the oil. That's what it's about, which is, to me, I was like, whoa, they just said it. Okay. But yeah, they don't care.
They don't care.
But yeah, it seems to be the calculus that if they can convince Americans that the country is under various dire threats, whether that is quote unquote radical left violence, which historically just pales in comparison to right wing domestic terrorism. Whether it's these foreign threats that Americans may not understand, or which information is not easily accessible or readily available. If I think they're thinking that if they can convince Americans that this country is on the brink of something really terrible, that will make a authoritarian figure like Trump or authoritarian regime more desirable. Because when an electorate gets scared like that, it's easier. You can mold them like Play-Doh, right? We've seen that throughout history. This seems to be the calculus. I don't know if it will work, but this seems to be what's going on in their head.
Well, this guy did January 6th is my short. I mean, the dude did January 6th, right? So, I mean, we were all there for that. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. So I have no reason to believe that he's going to leave power. Just he's going to be like, oh yeah, I'm done. Like, no, he's going to die in office like a king. That's his mindset.
Yeah, people like him, they never concede, and they never go quietly. It is like Americans have a short memory with this.
I can't believe they vote. I honestly, like, I knew they were voting him back. I like saw the energy. I remember I drove from Gettysburg to Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, which my book, Strange People on the Hill, that's where it takes place. It takes place in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, which is like a town that is there's a white nationalist castle there, and it's just how it impacted the people there. On the drive from Gettysburg through Pennsylvania to West Virginia, I just saw like progressively like more and more and more Trump signs all over the place. And around Pennsylvania, even in liberal areas, I just saw very few signs for Harris. And that's when it like dawned on me that like, wow, nobody really remembers or cares. It's like they can, everybody knew January 6th was like the most horrific thing imaginable. Like it was like, oh my God, we don't have a country anymore sort of feel. Yeah.
Right.
But then I just saw it and then nobody cared. And it was kind of just, like, it blew my mind.
Mm. I have a theory which I wrote a Substack about this week, and I'm interested to get both your opinions on it because of your experience kind of covering the far right. But because Trump and this kind of unitary government and this Christian nationalism and mostly the white supremacy, I would say, especially with the great replacement theory that many of them subscribe to, including Pete Hegseth and certainly Stephen Miller, that, the closure of USAID was really just to kill black people, as I see it, around the world. There's some estimates reckon that it could result in the death of 12 to 15 million people around the world. Going into Nigeria, which by 2050 will be the third largest country in the world, with 230 million black people in it, to fire missiles into Nigeria and not being smart enough to target ISIS individuals will mean that the collateral damage is again more people of color. Is it as simple as my instinct tells me that this is just an opportunity to kind of reduce the number of people of color because of their kind of white man insecurity?
It's a white supremacist regime. I think that is obvious. We could even look domestically at immigration policy, right? They said they're reducing the number of asylum seekers that they want, and priority is going to be given to applicants like people from white South Africans, right? It's very clear that they think, even looking at the rhetoric of the president or the vice president, they're hawking lines that you would have seen in white nationalist publications or on neo-Nazi forums even just a decade ago. Stuff that they would dog whistle to and now are just saying out loud. Catchphrases like import the third world, become the third world, right? The disinformation they spun up around the 2024 campaign, it was targeting communities that have high black populations, high immigrant populations, specifically black immigrants, right? Like in Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of
That
whom
stuff.
were eating
So
cats and dogs.
It's a constant drumbeat, in the background and oftentimes in the foreground as well of this administration. Whether I don't know enough to say that was like the sole calculus, but it certainly is like a guiding. It's the direction their moral compass steers, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's been like that really from the beginning of Trump's campaign.
Well, I was just going to ask if people of color with this regime are the equivalent of the Jews in the Nazi regime.
I don't think we're ready to go that far yet, but I do think that they're this is a difficult question, right? So, I mean, the influence of white nationalist publications for years and white nationalist writing. I think about Stephen Miller and his interest in American Renaissance, which is a white supremacist publication, and VDare. My opinion, my sense from reading these things is that they believe that Black people are less human. I don't know if that's the word that they would use themselves. They do all these things to prove that they're of less value, but they think that they're less human, and so they can justify, oh, we're doing this. We're going to do this alligator Alcatraz thing to people from Latin America to scare them from coming. We're just trying to scare. It's a scare tactic. Like they can justify that to themselves. But that can quickly ramp up to more eliminationist thinking, right? We're just sort of let's dispose of. They are, of course, married to, whatever's left of our democracy, and Black people count for a lot of votes. And when they're motivated to vote against people like Trump, they lose. The MAGA has fought a fairly successful, I think, campaign to make their brand successful in the Black community. And I say that in that they don't have to get everybody, and it doesn't have to be widespread that people like MAGA. It just needs to be enough of people that they tolerate it. And a good example of that is Nicki Minaj shows up at TPUSA. You go for a legitimate celebrity. I don't care if her brand is a little bit in decline right now. It doesn't matter. You got Kanye West went off the deep end. And they've turned Candace Owens into a very successful influencer, right? Like she's a MAGA. She came from scratch pretty much as a MAGA person, but has some Black fans. And I think it's just enough to obscure what you're talking about here. They're savvy.
Yeah. Well, you also have Clarence Thomas at the top of the tree,
he's quite a character.
Doing a similar thing.
I don't have many nice things to say about Mr. Thomas, or Justice Thomas, if you prefer. Right,
but they have that kind of far right nationalist control of the Supreme Court. They have Congress. They have the executive. They now appear to have much of the judiciary as well. And so even if the election is contested, if there is an election of sorts, then, this kind of political fight, both in the courts, but also in, the society will just continue.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, he ain't leaving. And I think, do you think it's time that people wake up to realize because the people are waiting for him to either be seriously ill. It's like a race between his health and the election. But I just, as I see it, this guy's just going to keep on going.
I don't know. I got to revisit my science textbooks from junior high, but I'm pretty sure he has to die eventually, right? Like he's got to die eventually. Yeah, I know. What you're saying is true. I think even more important than whether Trump die or not, it's just his movement itself will take on the same banner.
Yeah.
And, let's say they put J.D. Vance in charge, and then J.D. Vance is not going to leave power. I mean, they really believe that this is that they're never going to leave again, and they don't have to. And anybody who goes against them is a cuck, in their own party. So that's what you're dealing with.
Yeah, but I also think an important variable here, and something we've been talking about on our show a lot, is that his ability to pull it off, like he can't do it by himself, right? He needs all the think tanks behind him. He needs members of Congress behind him. And the only way that's going to happen is if they think that doing it is a winner. And already this year, I mean, these are exceptions, right? The Republican Party still is a MAGA party. The think tanks are still aligned with the administration and all of that. But you're starting to see things break off. It's not a very happy time to be a MAGA supporter. These, quote unquote intellectuals, that's what they call themselves anyway. They're biting at each other's heels.
Pseudo-intellectuals.
They're constantly fighting. Even the Turning Point USA America Fest, right? Big flagship. I mean, this is an organization that is pulling, near $100 million in annual revenue, right? One of the biggest conservative things out there. On the main stage, all the headline speakers are just shit talking each other, being like, "Yeah, Vid Shapiro, what's wrong with you? What's a
Ben Shapiro?
I mean, they're just
Megyn Kelly
fighting with each other,
yeah,
and have been since they got their asses handed to them in November, with these sort of off-cycle elections, and that vision works as long as the bulk of the movement and the power players in the movement still think that hitching a wagon to MAGA is going to benefit them or benefit like what their vision of what they want, right? But if they start to see it as a loser, and it seems like some of them are, right? You getting these swirlings that MAGA is dead, or like, Charlie Kirk was killed. What's next? What is the next step in this? Does it evolve? Does it go a different direction? What is the future of this movement? If that is not resolved, if the administration is not able to pull the gang back together in time for elections, and get the drumbeat going again, they might not have the backing. It could be just an absolute disaster for them, but it's so hard to know, right? I mean, as Mike pointed out, anything could happen. There could be a giant natural disaster and the administration responds really strong and it builds public support. There could be, God forbid, terror attacks, that sort of thing. There's so many just random things that can happen. Politics is a living organism, right? So maybe they can pull it together. But if they don't, if the movement going into the midterms or going into the 2028 elections looks how it looks now, I don't know that enough people will be convinced enough to stick their own necks out and risk it for something that they are contemplating. This might be a loser, actually. We might have to do something different.
Okay. We have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you both, Jared Holt.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can find my Substack at The Anthony Davis, and you can join the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.